On today's episode, I'm excited to have my friend and colleague, Brian Johnson. Brian is the founder and owner of Main & Johnson, which is a Charlotte, North Carolina-based business consulting and coaching company. At Main & Johnson, they aim to see small and medium-sized businesses thrive, not just survive. Brian is a persuasive and adaptable top performer who is skilled in establishing, managing, and mentoring key executives and business owners, as well as individual contributors in a business. He has a passion for changing the cultural fabric of people leadership, marketing, and sales in companies by empowering teams to exceed goals. Introducing the founder and owner of Main & Johnson, Brian Johnson. Welcome back to the show, everyone. On today's show, we have Brian Johnson, founder of Main & Johnson. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Vijay. I appreciate the invite.
Of course. So you work on strategy for business owners. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely not. No, I'm just teasing. Yeah. So my company, one of the things that we really enjoy is a lot of businesses. When I say small to medium, I mean, you can pick the range, but they're pretty much businesses that don't have a person for every single activity in their business. So when people have to look at how do they use resources and what do they do with them inside their business, it's always fascinating and fun to partner with them and kind of give them a game plan to really sort out what they want in terms of an outcome, and then work backwards from that to really figure out, like, how do we leverage what we've already got? And if we're missing something, how do we acquire it? And then once that's all kind of put forth in an effort, usually it's like music to the business's ears. So
okay, so when you talk about of what you currently have and what you're looking for, could you talk about some examples so we understand?
So in a lot of cases, I mean, everybody's usually in some way, shape, or form looking to grow and scale. I mean, it's probably the thing that most people align around. I mean, there's exceptions, but for the most part, that's kind of what people are looking for. And in a lot of cases, strategically speaking, people get into what do we have to do to get there? And in a lot of cases, it's what are we going to let go in order to get there? So we look at strategy as sort of, if you can define what you're going to say no to, you always will have the energy around what you're going to say yes to. So we work with companies to kind of, if they come to us and they say, Brian, we really want to grow our business over the next 3 to 5 years. We'd love you to sit down with us and help us develop that plan. We've got the execution resources. We maybe don't have the horsepower to develop something that's like a true north for the organization. And we don't always want to rely on the CEO to just sort of dictate. So usually it happens in there. So what we do is we come in and we'll do like a 90-day assessment period. And in a lot of cases, sometimes we've even had this where the assessment was really all they needed. They just needed some, kind of kick in the right direction. And we kind of come through, we look at the business, we look at the capabilities, and we look at the outcomes they're looking for, and we diagnose sort of what will it take to get there, and then working backwards. So when we talk about like a long range plan, if let's just say you're a manufacturing organization and you make, XYZ widgets. So we'll look at, okay, what are your goals? If they're margin goals, a lot of times revenue gets you there, but it's not the answer to the question, right? That's just part of the solution. And so we would develop with a company sort of like, what is your scale plan to hit that profit level or that margin you're looking for? And then what is things like, hey, which products do we right now maybe have a competitive advantage on? Which products out there do we have a higher margin on? And we try to play into that mix, growth, share gain, all of those things into that pocket that gets you to that result. Now, over those 90 days, we'll interview customers, we'll interview employees, will get kind of a feel for the culture and sort of your historical performance. And then really kind of just sit down and say, hey, here's what we see. Here's a little plan for you guys to go tackle. And, if you want to take it from here, great. Thank you for letting us kind of get you past the starting line. But here's also sort of like a 2-year proposal where we can kind of help you manage that strategic outlet and help you in the execution phase. You'll be the one going out and doing if we said sales, but you'll be doing the selling. But we'll help you kind of oversee that strategic process for the next couple of years. And if you need coaching or developing along the way, we'll key that in on a few individuals, however that works. But, we like to offer a solution, but also really give something that if you're good, just run with it. I mean, the whole point is it's your company, it's not ours. And we're not here to tell you what to do. We're here to partner with you on where you want to get to and what's the best approach to that. So that's kind of how we model it, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. You're more in the partnership kind of aspect without necessarily taking equity. You're just there as a consultant, strategy consultant.
Yeah. And we pair a lot. So we do get in sort of the exit planning, and we call it the kind of the buy side integration. So we'll play both sides. And I don't mean we're like a double agent or anything. We don't do it in the same deal. But if we have a company that comes to us and says, hey, 5 to 8 years, I really want to kind of cash out and get this business up for sale. There's a lot of people that do this and they do it quite well. And we're not stipulating that we're maybe the only ones on the consulting end that do this well also, we'll say. But a lot of times there's a plan, like do this, do this, do this, do this. We also, on the exit planning side, we like to sit there and work with you arm in arm, not only on what do you need to do, but how do you need to do it? When does it need done? And we'll actually work with you through that process. Because in the end, it's kind of like if you're selling your house, right? I mean, you always know sort of like, hey, if I put a coat of paint on it, I'm going to have a better chance of selling. Well, that's great. It's great when the real estate agent tells you, here's all the things you need to do to your home in order to get it ready. And then they tell you when it's ready, let me know and we'll list it. And then you're like, well, okay, now I have all these things I have to go do. What if I'm not a good painter? What if I'm not, so you have to bring in resources to do that. So in a lot of cases, we'll spend the time with them once you get past that, like, here's what you need to do to sell, and we'll actually work with them to make it happen. That's on the exit side. So and again, we don't get into brokering, but we like to partner with people that are in that process, that are better at getting the actual transaction done. We're better at getting the house all pretty, if that makes sense, for sale. And then on the buy side, we flip it around. And in a lot of cases, we have companies that come in and they buy and they do their due diligence. It's not that they don't nail that, but using the same house example, if you go into a house, you're going to see what they want you to see for sale, right? They're going to have a list price. They're going to have everything that they want you to know about. You can ask questions, but really, are they going to be able to answer what shape is the plumbing inside the walls? What type of insulation's in there? I mean, they're not going to, because you'd have to open the walls to get there. What we do on the buy side is when a company comes in and they've actually made the acquisition, or they're in the due diligence phase, we help them sort out and quantify the qualitative piece. So like, how stable is the customer base? Is there are you going to get in here and find out the customers loved the previous ownership and leadership? And if you didn't acquire them with the business, all of a sudden your customers start shopping around. Are you going to have an employee issue where they really liked who was there before, and this is now their opportunity to say, well, maybe it's time for me to step away, do something different. So we come in and we try to work with them to quantify some of the things that you just can't get as you're going through due diligence, and really help them map out. Now, once we do have these people, once we do have these customers, especially if it's an acquisition and not a straight purchase, like, hey, we're merging, two either similar or competitive forces together. How do we take that to market? How do we get that ROI on that purchase as fast as possible? So in a lot of cases, everybody's excited when you make the buy, but then it's like, oh crap, now we got to do something. And so we kind of play on both sides of that. Not again in the same transaction, but in a lot of cases, we'll get approached by somebody who's like, hey, I'm thinking about pulling the trigger on this business. Would you help us a little bit with some of the things that we may not be knowing about this market or industry, or that maybe we're missing here in kind of our analysis? So that's kind of how we kind of play that game, I guess, if you want to say.
So you basically help with the buying and selling of businesses without actually being a broker. It's more of the consultant role of seeing whether it's a good strategic fit.
That's absolutely right. And we partner with the people that maybe play that role, to be a resource that when they're kind of motoring through that transaction, like, hey, this actually does need to be done, or they're not going to get the value out of it. And they may say, like, we really don't go to that level. How could you help us get that? And so we'll jump in there.
Got it. What kind of industries do you usually work with?
My life has been around manufacturing, so I really have like a soft spot for that. And to be quite honest, like, anybody that sets up their own consulting business, so you get two forces of, what am I experienced at, and what would people pay me for, and then how do I grow that? And that's kind of where we landed. Now, we've done some things in the kind of medical services space, and so it's the process is really what we're working with. But in the end, I mean, it's hard to like ignore, I just love manufacturing. So it's hard to like pull myself out of that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I remember, switching gears a little bit. When you and I first met, you mentioned something about an airplane analogy. I'd love to rehear that.
Yeah. So if you get to know me better, or people that do know, they'll probably say, like, I don't want to say this is my thing, but like, you have like people that are storytellers or analogize things. It's like, I can't really just speak directly on something. It's always got to be an analogy. And I had a speaking event and was being asked to kind of talk about like business cycles. And this was even pre-COVID. And I woke up one morning, I had a whole slide deck ready to go. It's one of those you wake up at like 3 a.m. in a cold sweat. And I'm like, I can't do this presentation. I just can't do it. And I went down and I started kind of thinking through, I'm not saying that 3 o'clock is my prime time, but a cup of coffee at 3 a.m. is a little unique. So it had me in a different mindset. And I started thinking, like, what's something in my lifetime that I've done a lot of, which when I worked in the Fortune 500 space, I was always on an airplane somewhere all over the world and love that piece of it. So I'm not bashing, the jet setters and stuff like that. Now maybe I'm a little bit happier to be grounded, but or pick and choose when I fly, but I still enjoyed that. And I was like, okay, how does that correlate to business? Like, what is something that I did, flying to all these places? And I was thinking like big contracts, like cities that I'd been to. And it was like, duh, the big thing is it's like an airline. And so I kind of walked myself through this, and the analogy goes something like this: like, businesses are always in one of these four phases, and they may move back and forth depending on the circumstances, but generally we find people in one of these at some point, and they'll identify with one of them. And so the four phases we break out are like, okay, so you got your takeoff phase, right? And this is, on an airplane, this is seat backs in the upright and locked position, tray table stowed, bags underneath the seat in front of you. Like, it's a checklist. Here's all the things I've got to do to get clearance to take off. Well, when you're starting a business, it's like, do I have a business plan? Do I have funding for my business and enough cash? Do I have direction and vision? Maybe it won't go the way I set out, but at least I'm thinking, like, what does this look like in 5 years? Do I have the right partnerships? Do I have all the things? Do I have my EAN? Do I have all the things that allow me to be commercially viable and to begin that business? And so we say that's kind of like the takeoff phase. So these are all your startups, regardless of size, they can relate to something in there. And then you get into what we call ascension mode. This is that 0 to 30,000 feet. I mean, think about when you're on a flight, how often when the plane's getting from 0 to 30,000, do you get up and get your bag out of the overhead compartment? You don't. I mean, not even the flight attendants get up and move around during that period. So everybody's focused on one thing: sit back, let's get to 30,000 feet, and we'll go from there. So in business, this is kind of like that early period where, for small business owners, this is that period where they start waking up in the middle of the night, not knowing if their business is going to survive. This is where revenue is king, because you've got to create a business, whatever that industry level is, that's sustainable. And that comes only through top line growth. So when we look at top line growth, we're saying, like, how do I get to whatever my 30,000 foot level is, that I know at that point I'm going to be able to give myself a paycheck. I'm going to be able, when I wake up in the morning, I'm not wondering if today's the day my business winds up dying off. Like, I'm going to survive. And that's what your business is like in that phase, is really 30,000 feet is all I care about at this point. Well, once you kind of get over that hump, now you're in the phase we call cruising altitude. So this is where the cool stuff starts to happen. Your focus becomes profitability, efficiency, effectiveness. If you're an airline, this is where your loyalty starts to pay off, because the people that fly with you often get the best drinks and snacks. This is where you can get up and move around. The pilot will say something witty over the speaker. All that kind of stuff happens here, because it's no longer about survival. Now it's about execution and excellence, right? So how do we take care of our employees and put in engagement programs there? How do we put in customer retention programs? How do we grow our business? It's not to say that you won't adjust your altitude at all, but it's no longer a phase where my altitude only matters for survival. Now you're taking choices. I mean, flights adjust all the time for turbulence. Like, we're going to take this up to like 36,000 feet to avoid some rough air, is what they call it, I guess. But I mean, in the end, you make the adjustments and you set your course and you try to stay on where the destination is, but you may change the route a little bit along the way. And then our last phase that we kind of get into is descension. So I always think it's crazy, because, like, you can get from 0 to 30,000 feet in 10 minutes. And then when they say, we've now started our initial descent, it still takes you an hour to get down. But that's because it's a nice soft landing is what you're going after. You're not trying to rush to get anywhere. You're letting the process take its due course. So in business, if you get to that point where you're like, hey, I'm thinking this might be, 5, 6, 7 years, I want to exit this thing, or maybe you want to make it employee owned, or you've got somebody in waiting that you'd love to take over. We partner with businesses there to help craft what that landing looks like. And, honestly, if it's handing it off to somebody, we'll work with them to make sure they're, I guess, business ready to be the next leader. I mean, let's keep the legacy of this business going, even though you won't be there. And so we'll work with businesses on that. So we find that businesses land in one of those four spots at all times.
That's an incredible analogy. Thank you so much for going through that. I mean, So you basically use the airplane as an analogy for the business cycle,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. And well, I was going to say we've seen numerous times where you'll move back into ascension because you're at that scale point, right? And it's not to say that now it's survival, but you can ruin a business just as quickly going from level 3 to 4 as you can from 1 to 2. I mean, so it still takes the same focus in that growth period when you're scaling as well.
Absolutely. So which out of these four stages do you particularly specialize in, or do you prefer to specialize in?
Yeah, so we're our usually we're in 2, 3, and 4. So or ascension, cruising altitude, and descension. I mean, we write business plans for businesses and stuff like that, but we find, to be honest, until you've really sort of tripped or failed on your own, the value that we bring doesn't start kicking in until really you're at that point where it's like, okay, I can't miss again. So how do we really get the right focus if we're in ascension? If we're in sort of the cruising altitude, let's build this sustainable business. What do our scale levels need to look like? What's the cost of that revenue? So if I'm, from I just throw out an example, like if you're an HVAC owner, small trade business or whatnot, you may look at it and say, okay, I know 2 employees and a truck equals $300,000 of revenue. So if I'm going to purchase that revenue, how much does it cost me to get the truck? When do I need it? That sort of thing. So I can keep that scale going. And then obviously we mentioned the dissension part. We do a little bit more project-based work on that. And we do a little bit more kind of coaching in the middle, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Let's start at number two, the ascension mode. So this is when you're trying to grow top line revenue. I know you mentioned something in a previous conversation about the 80-20 rule when it comes to client acquisition. Talk about how that applies here.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a part of you that, when you're in that survival phase, there really is no answer to no to the question. It's like, do you do this? Yes, absolutely. And then you go figure out how to do it. Right. And what you have to try to do is sometimes the cost of that early on, when you say that, hurts you later when you're still in that phase because you're burdened with maybe customers that aren't the right fit. So what we work with people is, if it's customer acquisition, really defining your target customer. Like, and this is hard because this is the part of your business where you're learning what you are as well. So let's go out and let's figure out who is the right customer for us and how do we really hone in on them and then work backwards from that. And then there's other things in there, like, obviously you've got to operate your business properly in that phase. Because another analogy we use is in this phase is kind of like a bathtub. So if you think about it, if you turn your spigot on and water's rushing out, that's all of the resources you're investing in your business. And the water filling up in the tub is your business growth. Now, you know full well that unless you have a drain that's about like 2 meters wide, you can turn on that spigot and it will still fill up. But the question is, how much of that water is going to go down the drain while it's filling that you could have avoided to fill it faster? So we kind of try to come in and be the plug and really make it so that your resources and investments in that business return quickly, not just, hey, we'll get there, but we could have gotten there 2 years ago if we wouldn't have wasted this, and this. And we find business owners in this phase, while it's probably the most exciting because the risk reward is maybe the part that gets your blood flowing. But too many times we've seen people that want to behave like they should be in 5 years in year one. If it's you and another, 2 or 3 people running the business, great. Don't go out and hire 10 employees because that's your dream. Hire them when they make sense. And you think that sounds silly, but so many businesses are so hung up on where they will get to, they don't accept where they're at.
Got it. So this kind of ties into telling people to get out of their own way. And I know that's also something you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And I mean, normally a normal, let's just say, Joe business owner out there normally is good at a few things. And we try to exploit the heck out of whatever they're good at, obviously. Right. And this is why they're in business in the first place. But Joe business owner is probably not good at everything. And so what we try to do is get them to the point where, and this sounds simple, it is, but get them to the point where, hey, here's what I'm good at and I'm going to do. Here's what I need to delegate for somebody else to do. And here's who I need to be 3 years from now when the company's this, and work on that. Work on what you do really well and who you need to be, and let somebody else take care of the rest. And so we try to work with them on that.
That's great. So let's move on to the cruising altitude stage. This is when it comes to the growth, you can actually play around with efficiency and profitability. How do you, I guess, navigate scale hurdles?
Yeah, I mean, really, every company, every industry, has its own different set of scale things. So really what we kind of see is what right now, what in this current period is what drives the business and what will it be in the next one? Because usually the reason companies don't scale as quickly as they could is it goes from execution to capability. And that requires development or hiring or something. And so, you'll see the smallest businesses. I got one guy, he and I do all the work and I'm just comfortable. But I'm sure if you ask them if you could have it, would you want a bigger business? They would say yes. But they're comfortable because the effort for them, or what they perceive to be the effort to get to the next level, is harder than what it's worth to do it. And so what we work with companies is, let's understand what that next level looks like and what it takes. And then we define what that gap is. And so your scale hurdle, like if you're a $2 million business, and we kind of do the threes and tens. I don't know if you've ever heard that analogy, but like, seems like everything changes in multiples of 3 or 10. So, okay, backtracking, but this is relevant to the question. So sorry, this is where the stories come in, right? When we say threes and tens, you think about it when you and your partner get together, even if you wind up formalizing it, and let's say it's marriage, right? So husband and wife, partner, what the situation may be, once that happens, not a lot changes other than the legality of it. You're still two individuals that are choosing to be together. But then let's say you have a child. Life totally changes at the first child. So now you got three, right? So there, second child doesn't change a whole lot because you're like, we already know we're not going to sleep. We already, they already have that mapped out. So the second child isn't that different. Third child, though, starts to make it a little difference because now you got more children than you have parents, right? And so now 5 is the number, but you're really talking about 3 children. We also say in business, like, I always find that first $300,000 to make, if for a small business, can make it off the same platform that you started the business on. But sometimes you get to that 300,000 level and now you're hiring supervisors versus just workers, because you as a business owner are becoming an owner, not an employee in your own company. Same thing now, once you get over that hurdle and you've got supervisors and that model's built out, now you can build teams and supervisors and keep going. But usually around a million, it changes again. Well, usually that sort of kind of comes up in business where once you get to a million, and this is generalizing, that scale hurdle is really the same one that takes you to 3 million. Now you're hiring VPs instead of just supervisors. But once you do that, they can grow to like 3 million. Now at 3 million, you're probably, instead of an owner, you're a CEO. You're probably running and guiding a business, but you're 3 years ahead, 4 years ahead. You're not worried about the day to day anymore. So we've just seen that continue, like 3 million to 10 million, 10 million to 30 million. It just kind of seems to flow that way. I mean, give or take, of course, but that was kind of the threes and tens. And I forget where I heard that, but I started to think about it and it's like, I'm seeing that out there. So I bought in. So I'm a subscriber to that.
Thanks for the analogy. I had no idea. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, but when we find where people are at, like, yeah, we use that as a guideline to just say, hey, if you're at 150,000, you can probably keep doing what you're doing to get to 300. Let's just map that out. If you're at that like 250, you might be at that spot where it's like, yeah, you might need to hire somebody to manage people versus just doing this. And, obviously hiring executives and things like that, bringing C-suite level people into your business. Obviously, the recruiting's different. Obviously, the compensation's different, and the risk you take with those people is different, right? So, all of that being said, it sort of changes how you approach your business as you get to that point. I've always seen owners, CEOs, founders, whatever their self title is, when they get to the point where they have to hire somebody who might be smarter than them and might be better than them at something by far, that becomes a really hard hurdle to get through because you're going to have to empower that person hands down to be able to run that section of your business without really much more than oversight. So we work with them to kind of identify what actually is that exact piece that you need. And then how do we build it into your business so that when it comes to scale, it's pulling a trigger, it's not creating. It's like, okay, let's put out the hiring, notices and see who we get.
That's great analogies. Thank you again. Let's move on to number 4, the dissension. And this is when it comes to the exit strategies. Could you talk about exit strategies?
Yeah. So number one thing that we see out there with exit strategies is people wait till the last minute to do it. They just wake up and say like, you know what? And COVID's a perfect example. Getting through the pandemic, there are a lot of business owners that are like, I just don't want to ever go through this again. I don't want to have to fight so hard to get through normal execution. And they're like, I just want to sell this thing tomorrow. Well, I mean, you can. And in Charlotte, being Charlotte based, here in North Carolina, you've got a tremendous housing market, right? I mean, it's almost like you don't even have to list your home to sell it. Well, right now there's some of that with businesses as well, but the ones that get the highest value out of it and aren't rushing to cash out because of circumstance, they're the ones we kind of work with in that dissension phase where, you know what, I do want to go ahead. I've got an employee that I've, given some equity in and he wants to buy me out or she wants to buy me out over time. I want to put a plan in place to get through that with them, but I'm in no hurry. I'm still making money. It's more about the principle of doing it right than doing it now. And so we'll work with businesses in that phase to really kind of get that off the ground, map it out, get them through that piece. I say off the ground and we're talking a dissension, but we'll map out the landing is what we'll say. But ultimately what we're trying to do is say what's the right time period for you as an individual, as the owner to walk away. I mean, if you're kind of like, if you have health issues or something and you're just like, I can't put the time and energy into it, then your timeline's shorter. But if it isn't dictated by something other than your desire to get out, and that's okay too, let's look at what it would take for the business to get to the value that you want. So there's a time and there's a money aspect to it. And then when we get into it, now we're talking resources. How do we build that out? So if you know that you could get a multiplier in there of, 2 or 3x if you took your time to get out, because I'm going to go ahead and put customers into long-term contracts. I'm going to go ahead and work on the company culture and the leadership because I want to make sure these folks go with the company and whoever buys it knows what they're getting up front with those, so everybody's happy. But that doesn't happen instantly. So you've got to kind of build to that. So we build up while the plane descends, if that
No,
makes sense.
absolutely. That definitely makes sense. So how long does the actual exit strategy or timeline look like? Is it, hey, I want to sell in the next month, or is this going to be over 5 to 10 years kind of exit?
Yeah, I mean, we get asked all the time, like, how could you get this ready in the next couple months? And it's like, just list it then. I mean, at that point, you're just putting a coat of paint on the house and going from there. We usually recommend, like, when we meet with people that maybe aren't in that spot where I want to sell today, usually we try to tell them, if you can give 3 to 5 years to work through this, that's about the right amount of time. Because a lot of these things, it's kind of like if your business is the Titanic, you can't just turn on a dime, right? So you've got to be willing to look out further ahead and let yourself adjust based on what the sea is telling you, not, oh, here's an iceberg, we better move.
Got it. So this brings up another question. When you start a business, basically the takeoff, the checklist side, is it okay or is it advisable to have the exit in mind, or is that something that you shouldn't really think about?
Yeah, if you've got the foresight to know how it all ends, then you're in a really good spot, because in the end, it's not like, I'm starting this business, I can't wait to get out. That's not it. But it's like, hey, I want to start this business. I want to build it up to the point where, some tech company comes and buys it right out from under me and I get paid off handsomely. Great, because I'll tell you what, if you do it that way, you'll know exactly why you're doing the things you're doing along the way, and they'll be very intentional towards the end product. So we love that. I mean, if we run into a business like that, we're giddy because the mentality is already there. Now we just have to put the execution in place. The other side of it, when you're much more about, how do I take care of today, makes it a little bit more difficult because you first got to change the perspective and mindset before you build in the execution.
Thank you for that. Let's switch gears a little bit to talk about your ideal client. Going back to the 80/20, who do you love working with, and what type of qualities are there? And I guess advice for entrepreneurs to try to adopt these types of qualities when building a business.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's exit planning, consulting, or coaching, or somewhere in between. I mean, regardless, the owner that is maybe more geared towards the end result versus how it feels along the way is ideal. And I could flip that and say it's really somebody that's coachable. I mean, when you look at like the best golfers in the world, the best athletes in the world, they probably pay 2 or 3 coaches at a time to focus on what they're good at. And if an owner is more worried about, they're more geared towards the score rather than, hey, did I get enough playing time in this game, or did it go the way I wanted it to go? We find that they're great to work with. They're very good about the B side. Like, who do I need to be as the CEO, as the leader that runs this company long term? Or, if it's exit planning, that really becomes the spearhead that takes care of my employees, assures my customers that they'll be fine, and then makes the right sale on a business. We find the people that are in that position to focus on the end result and can maybe put aside it's tough. Sometimes when you're the CEO, you are the pride of the company. You're the one that created it in some cases. So how do we get you to that point where the coaching, the execution, and the result is really where you're focused on?
Got it.
Um,
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh,
no, I was just going to say, I mean, I could spend 2 hours talking about that, because we can say the flip of it is, if that's not the case when we start working with somebody, I mean, they're more concerned about today than tomorrow. That becomes very challenging for us from a customer base.
got it. What are some, I guess, qualities that when you see someone having this, you can almost guarantee they're not going to be successful in running their business?
So one of the things, and we get into this, like, this is a common conversation now, which is price. And it's common because, universally speaking, I think people would agree whatever it costs to run your business today is more than it was yesterday. That's usually a theme over time when you look cost up. But if you're a business that doesn't understand your value, and our vetting on this is, if we came in and told you our recommendation is you take price up 15%, let's just say that was the answer. And let's say it wasn't driven by current inflationary situations or whatever supply chain, and it was just generally speaking. If that's an instant resistance, then that's a company that really has no idea what their actual value is in the marketplace. Now, I'm not saying as a practice you want to go just start raising price, but if you are in a position where I need to do this because my business needs to thrive in order to give my customers what they want, and your customers understand your value, that's a different conversation. And what we like to say is, you will have people probably in your customer base that are price buyers and some that aren't. And you will lose your price buyers. But we tell people, you know what? The best gift you can give your competition is your worst customers. So let them go buy from your competition, because you can replace them with the people that are right for you. And we see, I mean, it's common. I'm the same way. I mean, if you ask me, Brian, do you do this in your business? I'll tell you, I'm protective about my current customers too. But every once in a while, you've got one or two that maybe you'd be better off with if you could swap them out for somebody who's more like the other, 80% of your customers that you really like.
Got it. That's extremely important. Let's talk about the discounts part of it. So let's say you have a business, and are offering discounts a good move to bring on more clients, or is that something that could hurt your brand?
It really kind of depends on how you look at it. Like, I personally think discounting as a rule is a bad idea, because once you give something in exchange for essentially nothing, you're never going to get that back. Right now, I'll be very frank about our business. When we talk about our small business end, the part where we work with, companies that maybe, 200,000 and less. These are, your everyday businesses on Main Street. It's where Main and Johnson came from in the first place, the street signs. But those businesses, they might look at something and say, when we work with them, I should say, we might look at them and say, hey, we know we can help you scale this business, and we can take this business and you'll be, $500,000 revenue in no time, then 1 million. If we know and are confident we can get there, some of those businesses haven't gotten through ascension yet. And so they don't have the cash basis to get there. We do what we call scholarshiping. And so where they might pay us each month, I might allow them to pay a lower rate and scale that up over time. And yet it is a discount to what we would say is our regular price, but upfront and in agreement, they're already knowing that that price is going to get to our regular price over time. And we set aside, even like, we'll work with 3 or 4 companies at a time where we have them on scholarship, if that's the word you want to use, where we somewhat subsidize their price. But to be fair, if I'm offering them the same thing I'm offering another company, I can't have them paying a third for it and somebody else paying 3 times as much.
Got it. So let's talk about the scholarship. That's a really interesting concept. I associate with universities, but how do you screen your potential prospects to see whether they deserve the scholarship or not?
Yeah. So when we sit down with company, I mean, the first thing I can tell you is, you throw out a big number to a small company and they're like, well, that's more than all my costs combined right now. If that's where they sit, and we offer, so we would talk to them about the way we approach scholarshiping businesses. And we tell them, like, hey, from the coaching angle, this isn't a 3-month venture, right? This is something where in 3 years, we expect we're still working together doing this thing, right? So let's take a long-term approach. But if you can go ahead and put some skin in the game now to get yourself through this hump, we know when you're paying for something, you're active with it. I mean, it's very uncommon that you'd be like, oh, there went a, $2,500 out of my bank account. That was nice. No, I mean, if something is worth it to you, you're going to work with that person. You're going to work with that vendor, if you want to say, or that consultant or whatever it is. So going back to how you asked the question, like, how do we screen individuals? Yeah, we essentially start talking to them about how much it is in the future, but what that ROI is in their business and that sort of thing. And when that clicks with them and the excitement is about where we will end up versus where I am today and how painful this might be to pay for, that's where we know those will be the people that if we start some scholarshiping, they'll work themselves out of it gladly because they're at that point where they can't wait to pay full price because that means they're making a lot more money or their business is where they envisioned it being. So
it's almost
that's really how the conversation
goes. Like an end goal. It's like, hey, here's your trophy. You got to pay a lot more because it means you've made it.
Yeah, and I mean that sounds very sarcastic or very narcissistic, but in a way, it's great because we wouldn't put them in that position as their coach or consultant where we would be the reason their business goes under. So they're working their way through this, and they're happy when they get to because, like you said, they're at that point where it's like, wow, I started the business, I wanted to get here, wasn't always sold that I could make it, but I have made it, at least to this point. And, we offer that out. We can't do it with everybody, obviously, all the time. So we try to maintain, 3-4 people in that phase where we do the scholarshiping. But we also look at it from our standpoint. This is downstream revenue that continues to grow. So, you talk about price with your customers. Well, it's not a conversation that we have to have in the scholarshiping because we've already built that into the initial offer. That's how we kind of approach it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that. Well, Brian, let's switch gears a little bit more. Let's talk about advice you have for entrepreneurs who are just starting out. What is one piece of advice that you think that every entrepreneur could benefit from?
To me, it's really if you can do anything well, be very good at saying no to stuff. Because especially early on in your business, there can be 100 networking events, and the next thing you know, I'm out every night of the week networking. Be intentional and be willing to say no, whether it's to yourself or to other people. Being confident with no is a game changer in my perspective.
That's great. What is your favorite business book and why?
It's Atomic Habits by James Clear. If you've ever read it, like to me, it's probably into some, I won't get into too much, but I make all of our customers read it right out of the gate. It's a requirement. And the reason is it starts with you, it starts with your habits, but it gets into the laws of habit formation, not just like an example would be if I want to go to the gym, it's not just go get a gym membership. It's okay, how do I set my alarm 10 feet from my bed so I have to get out of bed to shut it off? When I get over there, how are my workout clothes already picked out and laid out? You eliminate all the excuses to solidify the habit. And it kind of takes you from start to finish all the way through this. It's a wonderful book, James Clear, Atomic Habits. And I've never had somebody come back and say that was a waste of time.
I'm with you on that. I've read that book 3 times and absolute life changer.
Yeah. And I'm an audiobook guy. So, I literally have that, like, I'll be the weirdo at the gym that's listening to an audiobook instead of like music or something like, but that's just how I do it. Like I use that and I have that ready to go all the time. If I even get like 2 chapters, I'm perfect. It just kind of reminds me of what's important.
Dang, I guess we're both weirdos. That's the exact same thing I do.
Now I'm going to start looking at people in the gym and wondering what they're listening to in their AirPods, like, oh, I wonder what business book that is.
Brian, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Where can our audience get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks, Vijay. And I very much am appreciative for being a guest. But if anybody wants to get a hold of me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm probably the only Brian Johnson ever on LinkedIn. But no, I think if you search by zip code 28120, you can find me there. We also have a Main and Johnson page that people could locate us. You can check out our website, www.businessconsultingcharlotte.com, or, hit me up on email, bjohnson@mainandjohnson.com. So A&D, they don't like I guess it's an ampersand, but we love talking to business owners. So not everything for us has to do with, a client or a sale or something like that. But we get better at what we do the more we do podcasts like this with you, Vijay, and get asked the questions you ask. But we learn from every interaction with a business owner as well. So love to make those connections. And if there's anything we can do to help them out, we would love that as well.
Awesome. I'll put all this information in the show notes. So those of you listening, you can contact Brian directly. Brian, thank you so much again.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. Thanks, Vijay.